The Great Hall of the Galactic Concord was the oldest structure in the known universe that still served its original purpose. It sat on a moon called Seven, a lifeless rock that orbited a dying star in a system that belonged to no one. The builders had chosen this place 11,000 years ago because it was neutral ground. No species could claim it. No empire could own it. It existed only for one purpose: to be the place where the powers of the galaxy came together to decide the fate of worlds. The hall itself was enormous. Its ceiling rose so high that clouds sometimes formed near the top, and the walls were made of a material that no living scientist could identify. Some said the architects had built it, those mysterious beings who were said to have shaped the galaxy itself before disappearing into legend. Others said it was even older than that, a remnant of some civilization so ancient that even its name had been forgotten. None of that mattered to Ambassador Daniel Price as he walked through the massive doors and took his place at the table. He had been coming to this hall for 37 years, first as a junior aide, then as a translator, then as a negotiator, and finally as the chief representative of the United Earth government. He had seen things in this room that would have driven lesser men mad. He had witnessed the fall of empires and the birth of new ones. He had watched species that had existed for millions of years argue over the placement of borders that would be redrawn within a century anyway. And through it all, he had learned one simple truth: humanity did not matter here. Not really. Not in any way that counted. Daniel was 68 years old now, though the medical treatments available to senior diplomats kept him looking closer to 50. His hair had gone at the temples, and his eyes had developed the kind of tired wisdom that came from decades of fighting battles he could never truly win. He wore the formal uniform of the Earth Diplomatic Corps, a simple dark blue suit with silver trim that was meant to convey dignity without ostentation. It was a modest outfit compared to the elaborate costumes worn by some of the other species in the room, but that was appropriate. Humanity was modest in this company. Humanity was small. The table at the center of the hall was shaped like a massive oval, with seats arranged around its edge for each of the 17 species that held full membership in the Galactic Concord. The seats themselves were designed to accommodate beings of vastly different sizes and body types. Some were simple chairs. Others were pools of liquid for aquatic species. Still others were hovering platforms for beings who could not or would not touch solid ground. Humanity's seat was the smallest. It had been placed there 63 years ago, when the first human delegation had arrived at the Concord seeking protection and guidance. Back then, humanity had just discovered faster-than-light travel, a technology they had stumbled upon almost by accident while conducting experiments in quantum physics. They had ventured out into the stars expecting to find wonder and possibility. Instead, they had found a galaxy already claimed, already organized, already ruled by powers that had been traveling between stars when humans were still learning to use fire. The Concord had welcomed humanity in its fashion. They had offered protection from the dangers of the wider galaxy. They had provided guidance on the laws and customs that governed interstellar civilization. They had given humanity a seat at the table, a voice in the deliberations that shaped the future of the cosmos. What they had not given humanity was respect. Daniel took his seat and looked around the room at the beings who would determine his species' fate. To his left sat the delegation from the Empire, massive creatures of living crystal who had dominated galactic politics for the past 3,000 years. Their bodies were roughly humanoid in shape, but they stood nearly 4 meters tall, and their flesh was made of something that looked like purple quartz. When they moved, light refracted through them in dazzling patterns. When they spoke, their voices resonated with harmonic overtones that could be felt in the bones. They were the enforcers of the Concord. Their fleet was the largest in the galaxy, their weapons the most powerful, their soldiers the most feared. When the Concord made a decision, it was the who ensured that decision was carried out. They had crushed rebellions on 100 worlds. They had exterminated species who the will of the Concord. They were, in every meaningful sense, the masters of the galaxy. And they looked at humanity the way a human might look at an insect. Beyond the sat the beings who communicated through a complex language of clicks, whistles, and pheromones. Their delegation consisted of 7 individuals, each one representing a different hive cluster within their vast collective civilization. They had multiple limbs, compound eyes, and mandibles that never stopped moving. Humans found them unsettling, but Daniel had learned over the years that they were actually among the more reasonable members of the Conquered. They were practical creatures, interested in trade and efficiency rather than dominance. They simply did not care about humanity one way or another. Floating above their designated area were the beings of pure energy who had evolved beyond the need for physical bodies millions of years ago. They appeared as shifting clouds of colored light, their forms constantly changing as their thoughts and emotions flickered through them. They were the oldest members of the Conquered, and they rarely spoke in the assembly anymore. They seemed to find physical reality boring, a temporary distraction from whatever higher plane of existence they spent most of their time contemplating. But when they did speak, even they listened. There were others as well, the artificial intelligences who had been created by a long-dead species and had since evolved into something far beyond their original programming. A confederation of mammalian species who had banded together for mutual protection thousands of years ago. The crystalline consortium, ancient beings of pure thought who existed in networks of quantum-entangled particles spread across dozens of star systems. And a dozen more, each with their own histories, their own cultures, their own reasons for being here. All of them looked at humanity and saw the same thing, a young species, barely out of its cradle, useful perhaps as servants or laborers, but certainly not as equals, certainly not as a voice that needed to be heard. Daniel had spent 37 years trying to change that perception. He had studied their languages, learned their customs, memorized their histories. He had built relationships with individual delegates, found common ground where he could, and accepted compromise where he could not. He had fought for every small victory, celebrated every minor concession, and told himself that progress was being made. But progress was not being made. He could see that now. Humanity was in the same position it had been 63 years ago, perhaps even worse. Every treaty, every agreement, every arrangement that Daniel and his predecessors had negotiated had somehow left humanity with less than it had before. Territory had been surrendered. Resources had been given up. Rights had been signed away. And always, the Conquered had assured humanity that these sacrifices were necessary for their protection. Protection from what exactly was never quite clear. The galaxy was dangerous, the Conquered said. There were threats out there that humanity could not possibly understand, much less defend against. The Conquered would handle those threats. The Conquered would keep humanity safe. All humanity had to do was trust the Conquered and accept its guidance. Daniel had believed that once. He had believed it for a long time. It was only in the past decade that he had begun to see the truth. Humanity was not being protected. Humanity was being contained. The Conquered did not want humanity to grow or develop or spread across the stars. The Conquered wanted humanity to stay exactly where it was, a minor species occupying a minor system at the edge of civilized space, too weak to cause trouble and too dependent to even think about independence. That realization had changed Daniel. It had hardened something inside him, turned his quiet frustration into cold determination. He had begun to pay closer attention to the classified briefings that crossed his desk. He had started asking questions that he had never thought to ask before. And slowly, carefully, he had begun to understand that he was not alone in his doubts. There were others in the Earth government who shared his concerns. Military officers who chafed at the restrictions placed on human weapons development. Scientists who suspected that the Conquered was deliberately keeping certain technologies out of human hands. Politicians who wondered why humanity's seat at the table never seemed to get any larger, no matter how many concessions they made. These people had found each other over the years, had formed connections that existed outside the official channels, had begun to plan for a day that most of them did not expect to see in their lifetimes. They called themselves the Foundation, though they rarely used that name aloud. They were preparing humanity for a future in which the Conquered's protection was no longer necessary. A future in which humanity could stand on its own. Daniel did not know all the details of what the Foundation had accomplished. He did not know about the secret shipyards hidden in the outer reaches of the solar system. He did not know about the research facilities buried beneath the surfaces of moons and asteroids. He did not know about the weapon that human scientists had somehow, impossibly, managed to build. But he knew enough. He knew that today was the day that everything would change. The session was called to order by High Speaker of the, who served as the chairman of the Conquered Assembly. His crystalline form pulsed with authority as he struck the traditional chime that signaled the beginning of formal proceedings. Representatives of the Galactic Conquered, announced, his voice carrying easily through the vast chamber, we gather today to address matters of importance to the peace and stability of our civilization. The first item on our agenda concerns the human species and the ongoing negotiations regarding resource allocation in their home system. Daniel felt a familiar tightness in his chest. This was the moment he had been dreading and the moment he had been preparing for. The Conquered was about to demand another concession, another piece of humanity's birthright. And this time, Daniel was not going to give it to them. The delegate responsible for human affairs, a smaller crystal named, rose from his seat and addressed the assembly. As the representatives are aware, began, the human system contains significant deposits of certain rare elements that are of value to multiple member species. Under the current arrangement, humanity retains control of the inner planets and the primary asteroid belt, while the outer planets and their moons are designated as protected zones under Conquered administration. Daniel had heard this description before. It made the arrangement sound reasonable, even generous. It did not mention that the outer planets contained 90% of the resources in the system. It did not mention that humans were forbidden from mining those resources or even traveling to those regions without explicit permission from the Conquered. It did not mention that the arrangement had been imposed on humanity at a time when they had no choice but to accept whatever terms were offered. The current 5-year review of this arrangement has concluded, continued. Based on the assessment of Conquered experts, it has been determined that humanity's developmental needs would be better served by a modification of the existing terms. Here it comes, Daniel thought. Specifically, the Conquered proposes to assume administration of the primary asteroid belt, in addition to the outer system territories already under our protection. In exchange, humanity will receive continued assurance of safety from external threats, as well as access to a limited quantity of the resources extracted from these regions. The words hung in the air like poison. Daniel had known they were coming. His intelligence sources had warned him weeks ago that this was the proposal the Conquered intended to make. But hearing them spoken aloud, in this chamber, in front of all these beings who had already decided that humanity's objections did not matter, still felt like a physical blow. The asteroid belt was humanity's industrial heart. The mining operations there powered Earth's economy, provided the raw materials for the colony ships that were slowly expanding human presence through the inner system, and represented the only real wealth that humanity possessed. Without the belt, humanity would be completely dependent on the Conquered for everything. They would have nothing left to bargain with, nothing left to build with, nothing left at all. The Conquered was not asking for another concession. The Conquered was asking humanity to surrender. Daniel looked around the room at the faces of the other delegates. They were clicking quietly among themselves, clearly uninterested in the proceedings. They floated silently, their colors muted. They looked uncomfortable, but they said nothing. No one was going to speak up for humanity. No one ever did. Ambassador Price, High Speaker said, turning his attention to the human delegation. "The Conquered awaits your response to this proposal." This was the moment. 37 years of service, 63 years of humanity's presence in the Conquered, countless generations of human history stretching back to the caves and the fires, and the first dreams of reaching the stars. It all came down to this moment, to the words that Daniel was about to speak. He had prepared a response. The diplomats back on Earth had written it for him, a careful statement that expressed concern about the proposal while leaving room for negotiation. It was the kind of response that humanity had always given, the kind that delayed the inevitable while hoping that something would change. Daniel did not give that response. Instead, he rose from his seat. The movement sent a ripple of surprise through the chamber. In 63 years of human participation in the Conquered, no ambassador had ever stood without being formally recognized. It was a breach of protocol, a sign of disrespect, a challenge to the established order of things. It was exactly what Daniel intended. "High Speaker," he said, his voice steady and clear, "distinguished representatives of the Galactic Conquered. I have served in this chamber for 37 years. In that time, I have listened to countless proposals, participated in countless negotiations, and accepted countless compromises. I have done everything that was asked of me, everything that was expected of a representative of a young and vulnerable species seeking its place among the stars." He paused, letting his gaze travel around the room. They were watching him with expressions that might have been curiosity or contempt. They had stopped their clicking. Even they seemed to be paying attention. "In all those years," Daniel continued, "I believed that humanity was making progress. I believed that if we were patient, if we were cooperative, if we demonstrated our value and our good faith, eventually we would earn the respect of this body. Eventually, we would be treated as equals rather than supplicants." He shook his head slowly. "I was wrong." The word hung in the air like a gunshot. "I was wrong because I failed to understand the true nature of this institution. The Galactic Conquered does not exist to promote cooperation or ensure peace. It exists to maintain a hierarchy, a structure in which certain species rule and others serve. Humanity's place in that structure was determined the moment we walked through those doors 63 years ago. We were assigned the role of servants, and no amount of patience or cooperation was ever going to change that." High Speaker's crystalline form pulsed with what Daniel recognized as anger. "Ambassador Price," said, his voice carrying a dangerous edge, "you speak out of turn. You will sit down and await proper recognition, or you will be removed from this chamber." Daniel smiled. It was not a pleasant expression. "No." The single word echoed through the hall. "I will not sit down. I will not await recognition. And I will not be removed because in approximately 30 seconds, nothing that happens in this chamber will matter anymore." He reached into his jacket and a small device, a standard diplomatic courier capable of transmitting across vast distances through quantum entanglement. Several delegates flinched at the movement, clearly worried that he was producing a weapon. But Daniel simply held the device up for all to see. "This is a communication device," he explained. "When I press this button, it will send a signal to Earth. That signal will trigger the transmission of a formal declaration to every government, every military command, and every news organization in human space." He looked directly at High Speaker. "The declaration states that, as of this moment, the United Earth government formally withdraws from the Galactic Conquered. All treaties, agreements, and arrangements previously negotiated are hereby considered null and void. Humanity thanks the Conquered for its hospitality over these past decades. We will not be returning to this table." The chamber exploded into chaos. Delegates from a dozen species were shouting, their voices overlapping in a cacophony of languages and translation matrices. They were on their feet, their crystalline bodies pulsing with furious light. They were clicking so rapidly that the translation systems could not keep up. Even the normally serene were flickering through colors that suggested alarm. Daniel stood calmly in the midst of the storm, waiting. Eventually, High Speaker raised his hand and struck the chime repeatedly until order was restored. The delegates returned to their seats, but the tension in the room remained thick enough to cut. Ambassador Price said, his voice carefully controlled, "You cannot be serious. Withdrawal from the Concord is unprecedented. It would leave your species without protection, without access to interstellar trade networks, without the resources you need to survive. You would be isolated, vulnerable, alone in a galaxy that does not tolerate weakness." Daniel nodded thoughtfully. "You are correct, High Speaker. Withdrawal from the Concord is unprecedented. No species has ever left this body, because no species has ever believed it could survive without the Concord's protection." He smiled again, and this time there was something fierce in the expression. "Humanity is different." He pressed the button on the device. Somewhere across the vast distances of space, a signal was being received. Messages were being transmitted. Declarations were being made. The machinery of human government was shifting into motion, setting in course events that could not be undone. "As of this moment," Daniel announced, "humanity stands alone. We ask nothing from the conquered. We expect nothing from the conquered. We will not negotiate, we will not compromise, and we will not submit to any further demands." He turned to face High Speaker directly. "If you choose to leave us in peace, we will cause you no trouble. We will remain in our corner of the galaxy, developing our own civilization according to our own values. We will not interfere in your affairs, and we will not seek to expand into territories claimed by other species." His voice hardened. "But if you choose to threaten us, if you send your fleets to punish us for daring to leave your table, you will discover that humanity is no longer the frightened children who came begging for protection 63 years ago. We have learned, we have grown, and we have prepared." The chamber was silent. Even the most aggressive delegates seemed stunned by the boldness of the declaration. Finally, High Speaker spoke. "Ambassador Price, you are either very brave or very foolish. The Conquered has maintained order in this galaxy for 11,000 years. We have crushed rebellions by species far more powerful than yours. We have exterminated civilizations that our will. Do you truly believe that humanity can stand against us?" Daniel met this gaze without flinching. "I believe," he said slowly, "that you have no idea what humanity is capable of." He turned and walked toward the door of the chamber, his footsteps echoing in the silence. Behind him, the delegates of 17 species watched him go, their expressions ranging from disbelief to fury to something that might, in a few cases, have been respect. At the door, Daniel paused and looked back one final time. "The cosmos trembled when humanity arrived at this table," he said. "It will tremble again now that we have left." Then he walked through the doors and disappeared into the corridor beyond, leaving the most powerful beings in the galaxy staring after him in stunned silence. The news reached Earth within hours. In government offices across the planet, officials who had been preparing for this moment sprang into action. Military commanders activated protocols that had been developed in secret over decades. Industrial facilities shifted to wartime production. Communications networks buzzed with encrypted messages as the various components of human civilization coordinated their response to the most significant moment in their species' history. And in homes and apartments and workplaces around the world, ordinary people gathered around screens to watch the broadcast that would change everything. President stood in the press room of the United Earth Government headquarters in New Geneva, facing cameras that would carry her words to every corner of human space. She was 64 years old, a former aerospace engineer who had risen through politics on a platform of human self-determination. She had known this day was coming for 30 years. She had helped plan for it. She had sacrificed more than anyone knew to make it possible. Now it was her job to explain to 8 billion people why their government had just declared independence from the most powerful organization in the galaxy. "Citizens of Earth," she began, her voice calm but firm, "citizens of our colonies on Mars, on the moons of Jupiter and Saturn, and in the asteroid settlements throughout our system. Today, Ambassador Daniel Price delivered a message to the Galactic Concord on behalf of all humanity. That message was simple: we are leaving." She paused, letting the words sink in. For 63 years, humanity has been a member of the Galactic Concord. We joined because we were afraid. We had just discovered that we were not alone in the universe, and we learned very quickly that the universe was vast and dangerous and filled with powers beyond our comprehension. We needed protection. We needed guidance. We needed time to learn and grow. Her expression hardened. The Concord gave us protection after a fashion. They kept the more dangerous species from attacking us directly. They provided us with certain technologies that helped us survive, and they gave us a seat at their table, a voice in their deliberations. She shook her head. But that protection came with a price. Every few years, the Concord demanded something from us: territory, resources, rights. And every time we gave them what they asked because we believed we had no choice. We believed that without the Concord's protection, we would be destroyed. Her voice rose. We were wrong. The Concord was not protecting us. The Concord was containing us. They did not want humanity to grow or develop or spread across the stars. They wanted us to stay exactly where we were, a minor species in a minor system, too weak to cause trouble and too dependent to even think about independence. She leaned forward, her eyes intense. That ends today. As of this moment, humanity is no longer a member of the Galactic Concord. We owe them nothing. We accept nothing from them. We stand alone. She straightened. I know that many of you are afraid. I know that some of you believe we have made a terrible mistake. The Concord is powerful. Their fleets are vast. Their weapons are terrifying. How can we hope to stand against them? A small smile crossed her face. I cannot tell you everything. Not yet. But I can tell you this. For 40 years, the best minds in humanity have been working on a project so secret that even I did not know all its details until recently. They have developed something extraordinary, something that changes everything. She looked directly into the cameras. Humanity is no longer helpless. Humanity is no longer prey. Any species that threatens us will learn that lesson the hard way. Her voice softened slightly. I will not pretend that the days ahead will be easy. We face challenges unlike any we have encountered before. But I believe in this species. I believe in our courage, our determination, our refusal to accept limits that others try to impose on us. We have overcome every obstacle that history has placed in our path. We will overcome this one as well. She raised her chin. The cosmos trembles today, not because we are weak, but because we are strong. Not because we are afraid, but because we are finally ready to claim our place among the stars. She paused one final time. Citizens of Earth, citizens of humanity, a new era begins today. Let us make it worthy of our ancestors and of the generations who will follow. The broadcast ended. Across the planet, in every nation and every city and every home, humans looked at each other and wondered what would come next. 3 days later, they found out. They emerged from faster-than-light travel at the edge of the solar system, precisely where humanity's long-range sensors had predicted they would arrive. 47 warships, including 3 dreadnoughts, each one capable of destroying a planet. It was the largest military force the Concord had deployed in over a century. They had come to teach humanity a lesson. Admiral Christopher Lane stood on the bridge of the carrier Endurance, watching the tactical display that showed the approaching enemy fleet. He was 53 years old, a career naval officer who had spent his entire adult life preparing for a war that most people believed would never come. He had trained in secret, commanded classified exercises, and studied every scrap of intelligence about alien military capabilities that human spies could obtain. Now, finally, all that preparation was about to be tested. Admiral, his executive officer, Commander Burke, reported, "The fleet is holding position at the system boundary. They're transmitting a demand for our surrender." Christopher nodded. He had expected nothing less. "Put it on speakers." A moment later, a translated alien voice filled the bridge. "Human vessels, this is High Commander of the Imperial Fleet. Your species has committed an act of treason against the Galactic Concord. You will power down your weapons, surrender your ships, and prepare to receive boarding parties. Your leaders will be transported to Seven to face judgment for their crimes. Resistance is futile. You have 1 hour to comply." The message ended. Christopher turned to face his crew. These were men and women who had volunteered for this mission knowing that they might not survive it. They had trained for years, had given up normal lives, had kept secrets from their own families. They deserved to know what was about to happen. "All hands," he said, his voice carrying to every corner of the ship. "This is Admiral Lane. In a few minutes we're going to do something that has never been done before. We're going to fight back." He paused, letting the words sink in. The think were the same frightened primitives who came begging for protection 60 years ago. They think their superior numbers and their advanced technology make them invincible. They think that because they've crushed every rebellion in galactic history, they can crush us too. He smiled grimly. "They're wrong." He turned back to the tactical display. "Bring the weapon online. When they get within range, we show them what humanity can do." Commander Burke's voice was steady as she relayed the order. Throughout the fleet, 1,200 ships prepared for battle, weapons charged, shields powered up, pilots climbed into fighters, Marines checked their weapons one final time. And in the center of the formation, a single small vessel began to glow with an eerie light that had never been seen in this galaxy before. The weapon was ready. High Commander watched the human fleet from the bridge of his flagship, the dreadnought Indomitable. He had commanded forces for 300 years, had participated in campaigns that had reshaped entire regions of space, had watched species far more advanced than these primitive humans crumble before the might of the conquered. This would be no different. Analysis of the human vessels, he asked his tactical officer. "Primitive construction," the officer replied. "Chemical propulsion, basic energy shielding, crude projectile weapons. Their largest ships are roughly equivalent to our frigates in firepower. They have no chance in a direct engagement." Nodded, he had expected as much. "Signal the fleet. We advance in 5 minutes. Disable their vessels but minimize casualties. We want prisoners to make examples of." The orders were transmitted. The fleet began to move, its massive ships gliding forward with the casual confidence of predators approaching helpless prey. Allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. This would be quick. The humans would resist briefly because that was what young species did. They would fight and fail and die, and then the survivors would be brought before the conquered to answer for their insolence. The lesson would be learned. The natural order would be restored. The distance between the fleets closed steadily. "Sir," the tactical officer said suddenly, "we're detecting unusual energy readings from one of the human vessels, a small ship near the center of their formation." Glanced at the display. The ship in question was unremarkable, smaller than most of the others, with no visible weapon systems, probably a command vessel or a communications relay. "Continue the advance," he ordered. "It's of no concern." The tactical officer hesitated. "Sir, the energy readings are increasing. They're unlike anything in our databases. I'm not sure what." He never finished the sentence. the small human ship fired. There was no visible beam, no dramatic display of power. There was only a pulse, a ripple in the fabric of space itself that expanded outward at a speed that should have been impossible. When the pulse struck the Indomitable, the most powerful warship in the Concorde's arsenal, the vessel simply ceased to exist. Not destroyed, not damaged, not vaporized by overwhelming firepower. Gone, as if it had never been there at all. The pulse continued outward, passing through the formation like a wave through water. Ship after ship vanished, erased from existence with absolute, terrible efficiency. Carriers and cruisers and destroyers, each one touched by the ripple and simply removed from reality. In less than 30 seconds, 47 warships were reduced to scattered debris and a handful of escape pods. High Commander, barely alive in an emergency shelter that had been automatically ejected from his flagship in its final moments, stared at his sensors in complete disbelief. His entire fleet was gone. 300 years of military experience had not prepared him for anything like this. The human voice that came over his emergency receiver was calm, almost conversational. High Commander, this is Admiral Christopher Lane of the United Earth Navy. We're detecting your life pod. A shuttle will be dispatched to pick you up shortly. When you return to your people, please deliver a message for us. Could not respond. His communications array was damaged, his translator barely functioning, but he heard the words clearly. Tell them, Admiral Lane said, that humanity is no longer asking for permission. The transmission ended. In his damaged shelter, drifting among the debris of what had been the most powerful fleet in the galaxy, High Commander understood that everything had changed. The humans had not just won the battle. They had rewritten the rules of war. And the cosmos would never be the same.